Hello. And I'm sorry I physically can't be there with you because of other engagements here in Brussels related to my work. But I'm happy that I have a chance to tell a bit of the climate change and what we are doing and what we would need to be doing. Because I found this of utmost importance for the future of you, your life, and the whole life of the human beings on this planet. So what is the climate change all about and why it is so alarming? It is because of CO2 and other climate changing gases that we humans are emitting on the atmosphere more and more. Okay, why are we doing that? Basically it is on the resource efficiency, and that is the sort of a bad crux of a couple of issues. There's more and more people on the planet. We all have more and more available income to use. That actually is of course good and nice thing for all of us, but not always for the planet, because we have more and more products. So the diversity of the products is increasing. And the products are shorter and shorter on their lifespan. That means that, for example, I'm having pen and paper, I guess you are too. I'm having my tablet, my laptop, my mobile phone, my radio, my TV. And as you know, you could do all those things with your intelligent mobile phone. But the life doesn't work that way, because the new products or concepts doesn't totally take the place of the old ones. They just change their role slightly. And that ends up with the situation that there are more products and shorter life cycle of them. Who of you have a mobile phone that is older than 10 years? 5 years? 3 years? 1 year? And I wouldn't expect that many of you have 10 years or 5 years old mobile phones, because the development, especially in the technology field, is so vast and so fast that you can't use a 10-year or 20-year-old mobile phone. It gets stuck, and now we do not have a model how we could transform it to be more efficient and better battery and cleaner outside without displacing the whole old mobile phone. So this is basically the inefficient use of resources. For example, plastic is made out of fossil sources, and it is less than 20 years we have produced the half of the plastics in the world, and you know all the problems what the plastic soup is causing on the seas, and microplastics in the fishes and our lakes and rivers. But the forecast for the future is that we would almost fourfold or fivefold within 20 next years our production and consumption of the plastics. Can't survive that. So first of all, we would need to take this issue seriously. And what I mean by seriously in climate change is that if you look the increase of the temperature and CO2 levels in the planet, they are skyrocketing. You all have seen the news about the ice cover, for example, in the Nordic area. Here is the figure 84 and 2016. Or you have probably seen the figures of climate shortfall. So actually how the climate change is running out of our hands, what the governments have pledged, that means what they have promised so far, and what they have done, and actually what would be needed then to curb down the climate change. And the unfortunate story is we are not even close to the commitments what we would need to do and what needs to happen globally, or that matter in Europe, or that matter in Finland. Okay, what then is the question? The question is that because of this increase of resource consumption and the lack of circular economy, and because of the inefficient actions what we have had so far from 1990 on combating climate change, we always have promised and done a bit 20, 30, 40% less than what would have been required, is that we would need to do much more and faster and sooner. And this is called a phenomenon called carbon crunch. And there's the mean budget of around 600 gigatons of carbon dioxide left to emit before the planet warms dangerously by more than this 1.5 or 2. And actually some people are forecasting and say that we are already close to 1.5. So we are point the safe levels. We are past the safe levels anyway. So actually what you can see here is that if we pass the effective actions up to the 2025, and this is the trajectory of the decisions what we have made so far in the EU, for example, the cut of the emissions should be so drastic, it is this black line here, that no one actually knows how you would cut emissions within 5 years, basically, from existing levels to next to zero carbon emissions. And that then means that actually we should start right now the effective climate politics. Okay, and now we are talking about your future, because you can all imagine what age you are probably by 2020, 2030, 2040 and 2050. Basically 30 years from now, none of you are going to be that old, and either we are in non-livable planet within 30 years, or we have to solve this climate challenge. Okay, what does it then mean? We would need to take this issue sector by sector. And I'll pick up first the transportation. And what that would mean is two things. Firstly, we would need to decarbonize the transportation sector. We do have the experimental ships and container ships that are running on solar and wind energy, but practically that is not yet there. But within 10 to 20 years, we should need globally a regulation that all ships should be running primarily on renewable wind and solar. Seems a bit quite different kind of a structure than nowadays. But that means that we would need to curb down the logistics, the transportation of goods, because more or less 70% of the goods are produced in Far East, in China, mainly, and they are transported on the other parts of the world. And if you look the forecast of the amount of goods and transportations, that would mean a huge amount of extra transportation. And before we are there on the solar ships, that would mean then quite amount of emissions. And that means that the goods need to be repairable, upgradable, reusable, and the raw materials should be much more recyclable on the Europe, or that matter in the China, when we are discussing the Chinese base. Then the another part is, of course, the transportation of goods on railroads and roads. And all that is possible should be removed from roads to railroads. And that should be a drastic change. And we do have some of the trucks already running on electricity. And that is going to be the future. Within, I would say, about 30 years. It is either trucks with paddles or with possibility of using remote electricity, a bit like the trains are using it. And of course, the private transportation, private cars, there's no question about it. Within less than 10 years, it needs to be totally electric. And that energy that produces the electricity needs to be renewable from solar and wind primarily. Okay. Then the question is how we can build the cities and the urban environments so that you need less transportation, that you can move better with your feet, with public transportation, and then again with bicycle or other means. That means that non-fossil based fuels has to be a part of the transportation solution in air, in flights. And that means that we have to transfer the short-term flights to be on speed, very effective trains, both in Finland and in Europe. Basically, we should have only 2 or 3 places where we fly on the Finland, and more than half of the destinations in Europe should be replaced with these speed trains running with the speed of more than 300 kilometers. Then the electricity and energy production. There's a place in energy production for biofuels, but this is very minor part because we have to transform a big part of the fossil economy on bioeconomy. For example, the clothes. The synthetic fibers are actually plastic, they are actually fossil based. And they should be transformed to be bio-based. That means instead of a cotton, they should be based on wood. And those technologies, as we know, exist already. And they should be totally in closed loop, so circular. When I don't use this dress anymore, it is thrown on the reproduction cycle, and new fibers and new thread and new clothes would be made out of that. And because we need the vast majority of the wood on biochemicals, especially bioplastics, biopacking, a huge part of the plastic problem is coming out of the packing. 2/3 of the plastics in Europe is consumed and the waste is produced by packing. And we need to replace that with the wood-based, non-toxic, recyclable, good biomaterials. So there aren't that much of a left for bioenergy. And then again, to be frank to ourselves, bioenergy is counted, and it should be counted, of non-emitting, so it is a CO2 balance. But frankly, of course, the emissions are there if you burn the wood or you turn it to biodiesel. And then again, it is better to use it on construction, on buildings, on biotechnology, on fibers, on packing, on all these. And as I envisage, because of this, the biodiesel is not going to be the major solution either for the energy production nor the decarbonizing of transportation. In energy production, we would need to produce, and this is possible by 2050 according to different studies, we need to produce 90% of our electricity from renewables, meaning solar and wind by 2050. That means that we need European-wide grids, supergrids, so that the electricity produced somewhere can be effectively used in other parts of the Europe. It means small-scale production like solar panels on the roofs. So actually people become prosumers. They both consume the electricity and have an electricity bill out of that, but they become producers also, and they are selling on the net the electricity they are producing. And that can be very big scale if that is effectively done all over the places in commercial, industrial, on public and private buildings. And then again, there's the possibility on seas, on deserts and other areas to produce in massive scale, especially solar, but also the wind energy. And there need to be the linkage on that kind of energy production from Northern Africa via this kind of a grid connection over the Mediterranean. Because there you would need only 100 square kilometers to produce all the electricity, theoretically, what the Europe needs. And the good part is that if we increase the solar energy electricity production in Northern Africa, we can buy it from there. It's an income and possibility for development for them in one hand, but then on the other hand, this enables them to add and increase the capacity in the scale that it also produces the needed renewable energy for African continent. But producing the electricity is not only enough. What you need saving and effectivizing the use of electricity. And this is the smart grids. That means that your lights are turned out when you are not in automatically. Your washing machines or your refrigerators or whatever are turned down when there's a lot of consumption in other parts and then turned on in the quiet moments. And it is sharing of the energy in the neighborhoods and a lot of possibilities there. But there, then, okay, transportation, the energy production, and the third sector is the buildings. And the buildings are the huge possibility. They are the biggest part of the energy consumption via the materials that are used there and via the energy consumption of the buildings. And if we can by 2050 build energy efficient buildings that are by energy consumption totally energy neutral, that means they don't they are passive houses. They are so effectively built that they need next to nothing on heating and cooling. And then if you combine the production of the renewable energy, that means that they become energy positive houses. And the houses, if you remember that quite a big part of the emissions actually come from materials and how short time they live. If you can build and design the houses in modular way, that means Lego houses, that kind of a modulars that you can insert and take out and reuse and reconstruct on the new places, you would actually solve almost half of the climate change challenge. This is a huge, huge opportunity. And of course that would mean less costs and more flexibility in housing. So I think that all of us would be more than happy with that kind of a solution. Then besides these solutions, there are of course the agriculture. And quite often it is said, no, well, what can you do with agriculture that you can't sort of prevent cows, for example, of having methane emissions? But actually you can. If you think that kind of animal meat or milk production, where the animals are inside and they are fed with that kind of a feed that is produced, let's say in Brazil, GMO soya, that you have cut down the rainforests to produce it. The emissions of that milk or that meat are huge, and you just can't sort of compensate them by any way. But then again, if you took that kind of animals that actually feed mainly outside with natural feed, what happens? They have less methane emissions, and because the animals move, their digestion is better. It's a bit like with us humans. If we just lay down in the sofa, our digestion is worse, and our methane problems are bigger than if we exercise and go out and have a bit of more balanced diet with a lot of veggies and all that. And then if you have that kind of a cattle that is basically almost all of the time outside grazing, the climate impact can be close to neutral. So there's a lot what the agricultural can do. And it is organic, it means outfeeding, and it means local feed for the animals, and that goes to everything. And that can happen even in Finland in Nordic conditions. There are a lot of producers, especially in meat, but in dairy side too, in some of the sectors that are doing that already. But that is also in the question of a pork, and I hope to see much more and better examples in broiler and hen raising and on the egg sector. So the agriculture can play a big role also. Last but not least, and that was sort of a debated in Finland, what is the role of the forests? Okay, I already mentioned to you that we need huge quantities of wood and forest for that kind of buildings, for biotechnology, for packing, for clothing, and other sources. But then there's another role, because the only thing how we can decrease significantly the amount of CO2 in the air is having more forests and better capacity. That means that all over the world, especially in Europe, and we knowing how to do good forestry in Finland, we should increase, not decrease, our forest cover. And the forests are the main saver and the sink what we can use within the upcoming 30 years to decrease the emissions that are already in there. Then again, if you burn it, what happens is that the emissions are counted in the air, increasing the amount of CO2 there. So it is a tricky tackle, and actually we could have used the forests more on bioenergy on 1990, when this kind of a phenomenon where we are and figures where we are now were predicted to be foreseen in 2150 or 2100. But the speeding of the phenomenon has done it much faster than anyone could anticipate. And so we need to act effectively and now, so that we wouldn't pass the tipping point, the point that it is a runaway phenomenon that we actually can't stop anymore. And still we need mitigation, because the phenomenon is going to cause quite significant storms, floodings, heat waves, droughts, all that is globally a everyday phenomenon. So on the one hand, I really would plead you to take this question seriously. It is the biggest threat that the humankind is having at the moment. But then on the other hand, I don't want to scare you, because we know the solutions. How to decarbonize transportation, how to turn our energy production on renewable solar and wind, how to transform our buildings from big sources to actually big producers of renewables. We know what we need to do with our forestry and agriculture. Now the only challenge is to do it. So please tell your teachers, your friends, your parents that let's us do it. This is good for us, for our business, for the planet and for the future.